The Royal College will ballot nurses over dropping the no-strike rule. It says patients won't suffer. Digging up the dead in Rwanda as an inquiry begins into the massacre at Kibeho. And Winston Churchill says he could have got double the 13 million the lottery paid him for his grandfather's papers. Good evening. The Royal College of Nursing, the largest of the nurses' unions, has decided to ballot its members over changing the no-strike rule in its constitution, so paving the way for them to take industrial action. They're angry about their pay award this year. They were offered 1% nationally, with up to a further 2% to be negotiated locally. The college says they may withdraw their labour in some way that will not directly harm patients.
The deepening feeling of dissatisfaction among the RCN's 300,000 NHS nurses is typified by Margaret Jackson. A theatre sister in Belfast's Royal Victoria Hospital, she qualified when Harold Macmillan was Prime Minister. Now for the first time she wants the union's no-strike clause abolished and is thinking the unthinkable, industrial action.
It's something in my wildest dreams when I started nursing in 1960. It never occurred to me that I would have to consider it in any way. And I really I find it depressing to think that I have to now consider doing such a thing in order to take my profession forward, to know that we're recognised and valued for what we do.
But there's no danger of nurses from the RCN abandoning the wards. They say nothing will ever be done to damage patient care. Dumping the RCN's no-strike policy would at this stage be largely a symbolic gesture. Nurses say it will demonstrate the depth of anger over pay and show the government that their goodwill can no longer be taken for granted. In London, the RCN leadership said future action might involve nurses refusing to fill out forms, which the union claims could cause administrative chaos in hospitals. Even that would be a momentous step for a union which has never sanctioned industrial action since it was formed in 1916.
Overwhelmingly, the view that we're having from members right across the country is that they feel that they are being pushed into it. They feel that the government has taken no notice of nursing, that every time doctors threaten industrial action, the government seems to roll over and give them just what they want, and nurses are very angry.
To date, of the 482 trusts in the UK, it's estimated that 195 have made pay offers. Of these, 4 out of 5 have offered the full 3% the nurses want.
Oh no, he's banged his head.
The dispute, though, is not just about pay, but how it's negotiated. Nurses want to retain national pay bargaining. But managers in Belfast and throughout the NHS want all pay settled locally, which will mean different hospitals paying different rates.
Local pay will give the Trust the opportunity to look at how it's spending its money. We're working with a budget of over £100 million. Between 70 to 75% of that is staff costs. If we have local arrangements, we can look at rewarding our staff locally to meet local needs.
The NHS executive says there's no place for industrial action in the health service and is warning that even limited disruption could affect patient care. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, Belfast.
An independent inquiry is being set up into what happened in the Kibeho refugee camp in Rwanda last weekend, when up to 2,000 Hutus died. During a visit to the camp today, the country's president said that representatives from the United States, Canada, 5 European countries, including Britain and France, and the Organisation of African Unity would be asked to take part.
Rwanda's president ordered the mass graves in this camp to be dug up today, a gruesome attempt to prove to international observers that hundreds of refugees rather than thousands died last weekend. This amateur video records the sound of Tutsi troops opening fire on the refugees.
I saw one woman quite obviously reacting to a shout which came from her right about 30 metres away. She stopped, she turned, she put her hands high in the air. I took my eyes off her for a moment as an RPA soldier walked towards her, He carried on walking, and ultimately he shot her and she fell dead where she tried to surrender.
2,000 survivors have stayed in Kibeho camp, a last stand in defiance of the Tutsi army, who are trying to starve these refugees out, refusing to allow them food or water. The rain they collect is all they have to drink, and they're growing hungrier and weaker by the day. The squalor here is unspeakable and the smell utterly nauseating. These people have been living among rotting corpses and human excrement. It can only be a matter of time before there's an epidemic of disease, and yet still they steadfastly refuse to leave. One refugee told us he'll have his hands tied up by Rwandan troops if he agrees to go, and then they'll slit his throat. But there's little doubt Hutu extremists here who fear prosecution for last year's genocide are making the other refugees stay, especially the women and children.
My impression is clearly these people are being held hostage by the hardliners in this camp. Clearly from the conversations they've been having and the interviews they've been giving, even small children their heads are just full of propaganda. It's really, really frightening.
United Nations troops formed a corridor offering protection to the refugees if they agreed to go.
Go to water, go to food, take your children, take the women with you. I assure you that nothing terrible will happen to you, nothing bad will happen to you.
But the refugees were not impressed. In the end, only one of them left the camp today. The rest are convinced they'll be killed by the Tutsis if they leave, and so they think they may as well stay here and die. Ben Brown, BBC News, Kibeho camp in Rwanda.
Here, the decision to spend more than £12 million from national lottery funds to buy a collection of papers belonging to Sir Winston Churchill has been defended by the Prime Minister. Opposition MPs have strongly criticised the sale, but tonight the major beneficiary, the Tory MP Winston Churchill, said that the National Lottery Fund was only buying his private documents, not official papers. Our political correspondent Jeremy Vine reports.
Britain's most unlikely national lottery winner emerged this evening to say the huge row over his £12.5 million windfall was based on misconception. It was private papers, not state documents, that he'd sold.
I certainly think it's infinitely preferable that it should be lottery money rather than taxpayers' money. And certainly the last thing that either I or the family trustees wanted was for these papers to be lost overseas.
But the question is, what papers? Throughout the day, critics of the deal Mr. Churchill had struck were claiming the material should be the nation's anyway.
Would not the Prime Minister's great predecessor, Winston Churchill, be turning in his grave if he knew how much of the public's money was now being spent to purchase his state papers?
Mr. Major offered a complex defence. The deal was for Churchill's private papers only, he said, although
the government decided at the same time to transfer the state papers similarly to Churchill College. There is no question whatsoever of lottery money having been used to purchase papers that are the property of the state.
Tonight, other questions were chasing the document collection, which includes schoolwork more than a century old and a first draft of the line, "We shall fight them on the beaches." After it was claimed the government was getting the material at half the world market price, it transpired that Mr. Churchill would have had to pay 50% tax if he'd sold the papers elsewhere. So some say he probably couldn't have got a better deal. Labour called for greater transparency.
Was it 13, 14 million paid, or was it 20 million? Depends how you look at the tax arrangement. I think clearly those people who contributed to that huge sum by buying their lottery tickets will want to know exactly what was the price.
And a former Heritage Secretary was candid in his disapproval.
I think if you'd asked 100 people in the street 2 days ago whether they really thought National Lottery money would be used to pay Winston Churchill's family to buy Winston Churchill's papers, I think they would all have thrown up their hands in great astonishment.
No one has yet said the Churchill memorabilia of the kind that draws thousands to the cabinet war rooms is not worth keeping. The question is whether it's worth £12.5 million, by far the biggest grant the lottery has yet made. 9 arts projects had to split £2 million. Given that ministers technically have no part in the dispersal of lottery funds, Mr Major's very deliberate intervention today shows how keen he is to protect the National Lottery from damage. Jeremy Vine, BBC News, Westminster.
Timothy McVeigh, the main suspect in the Oklahoma bombing, is now appearing before a specially convened court in the prison where he's being held. During the hearing, which is expected to last for 2 hours, the FBI will present the first firm evidence that's said to link McVeigh directly with the bombing. The official death toll has now reached 110, with 97 still missing, including 5 children.
This pre-trial hearing at a special court in the prison where Timothy McVeigh is being held is the first stage in what will be the biggest mass murder case in American history. Federal prosecutors argue he's a danger to the public and likely to abscond. The former soldier and Gulf War veteran hasn't cooperated with the FBI, but they've amassed evidence against him. In the unlicensed car McVeigh was speeding in when arrested, they found forensic traces of the TNT and fertilizers used in the bombing. Witnesses say they saw him running from the truck where the bomb was placed. The policeman who stopped him has been speaking for the first time.
I don't feel like a hero. I just did my job. Troopers out there on the road every day and other law enforcement officers that do the same thing. I'm no different than they are.
Alleged co-conspirator Terry Nichols has given evidence McVeigh told him 3 days before the explosion something big is going to happen. In Nichols' Kansas home and garage, police found an anti-tank weapon, 33 firearms and containers made of blue plastic like that embedded in victims' bodies. McVeigh's defense attorney tried and failed to withdraw from this case following death threats. Senior lawyers say it will be tough to find an impartial jury in Oklahoma.
Mr. McVeigh and whoever else may be joined as defendants, the vast public view them as vermin, something that you wipe off your shoe before you come in the door. And defendant of that ilk, that trial is going to be fraught with pitfalls.
The number of bomb victims found now exceeds 100, with about the same number still missing. Most people here are still shocked by evidence that the bombing was apparently the work of American conspirators, an enemy within. Now they want to know why they did it, and after due process, the authorities want those guilty to face the death penalty. Wesley Kerr, BBC News, El Reno Prison, Oklahoma.
Here, the Monopolies and Mergers Commission is to investigate claims that consumers are paying too much for electrical goods such as hi-fis, washing machines and freezers. Their inquiry follows a report by the Office of Fair Trading, which said manufacturers who supply more than a quarter of Britain's household electrical goods are forcing retailers to keep prices artificially high.
26 manufacturers, including some of the biggest names in household goods, are to be investigated. The Office of Fair Trading says the prices of some products may have been kept artificially high. The Consumers Association magazine Which is about to publish a report containing similar allegations.
Manufacturers are exerting pressure on retailers to keep prices artificially high. Now they exert that pressure by either saying that this is the price you will sell at, and then threatening to withdraw supplies of goods if those goods are priced lower than the price that the manufacturer wants to set. We also found some evidence that manufacturers even set sale prices.
Cut-price retailers like Costco, which has a warehouse at Thurrock in Essex, will refuse supplies of electrical goods before they even started trading. They subsequently made a complaint to the OFT, but the suppliers say there's been no foul play. TV manufacturers insist that consumers have a wide choice of products, and you don't have to buy them in big stores like Dixon's. There are many small independent outlets as well. The manufacturers insist that prices have been falling, while quality and reliability are on the up. Kenwood, one of the big makers of hi-fi equipment, says claims of price rigging are laughable.
Well, everybody fights against each other. We've just seen the demise of Rumbelows, mainly because they felt that they couldn't make a profit out of retailing. Dixon's are very strong, Comet are very strong, and we've got a lot of independents. All of them fight for their market share between themselves. So yes, it's very, very competitive out there.
It will be up to the Monopolies Commission to decide who's right. The OFT says it's been given information that some retailers wanted to sell at 20% below the recommended retail price. If the Commission finds that's correct, it could be very good news for consumers. John Fryer, BBC News.
The government's planning to set up a working group to consider how to reduce the high divorce rate. One of its tasks will be to put forward ideas on helping couples to prepare for marriage. The proposal came from the Lord Chancellor, Lord McVeigh, when he presented his white paper on divorce law reform. Under the proposals, quickie divorces would end and couples would be encouraged to settle their differences through mediation. Sir Ron Deering, the chairman of the national lottery firm Camelot, is stepping down because of health problems. Sir Ron is resigning from several other jobs, but will continue as chairman of the School Curriculum and Assessment Authority. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Jonathan Aitken, has issued a libel writ against Granada Television over the World in Action programme about his business dealings. Just over 2 weeks ago, he issued a writ against The Guardian, saying he was determined to fight the cancer of bent and twisted journalism. Lloyds of London may be facing a further cash crisis. The city analyst Chatset says that Lloyds will need a cash injection of nearly £1.5 billion to cover losses in 1992. It also says the names who underwrite the market may not be able to pay it. Lloyds, who published their official 1992 results next month, have denied that they have a cash problem.
1992 was a disastrous year for the insurance industry. Hurricane Andrew in Florida was the world's largest ever insured loss. But Lloyds continues to be hit by something financially more devastating: the massive claims which continue to pile up from policies written long before 1992. Chatset, the leading independent Lloyds analysts, estimate that new losses in 1992 amounted to £235 million. But old losses, which became payable in that year, are estimated at £1.24 billion, making a total loss of just under £1.5 billion. That would bring Lloyds' cumulative losses since 1988 to a staggering £9 billion. Thousands of Lloyds names, the individuals whose wealth allows the market to function, have resorted to litigation in disputes over who should pay for the losses. Chatset reckons Lloyds will have to ask names for another £1.5 billion this year to cover the 1992 loss.
Even that may not be sufficient. They may have to go to the Bank of England and ask for a very substantial loan, something like £1 billion or £2 billion, just to give them sufficient cash to pay the claims while they try and sort out the problems with the names.
But Lloyds said it was not in discussions with the bank, nor did it foresee the need for any such talks.
I have made statements earlier this week making it absolutely clear that the Council and my colleagues believe that without doubt we shall pass the necessary solvency test in August this year, as indeed we did at August last year.
Everything depends on Lloyds agreeing a compensation deal with the names who are disputing their losses. Without a settlement, Lloyds will be in real danger of running out of cash. If Lloyds of London were forced to close its doors, that would cause a massive reduction in the UK's capacity to insure the world's risks. But even so, that would be unlikely to mean the end of London as an international insurance centre. Greg Wood, BBC News, at Lloyds of London.
The President of Germany has said that today's Germans bear the responsibility of ensuring that the Holocaust is never repeated. He was speaking at the site of the Belsen concentration camp on the day that Jews around the world officially remember the 6 million people murdered by the Nazis.
Leaders of the new Germany, including Chancellor Helmut Kohl, took part in the remembrance of what had happened in the old Germany. They joined survivors of the Holocaust at the clearing in the forest, which, with its monuments, is all that remains of the camp where 50,000 people died. The memorial service on Holocaust Day brought Germans face to face with questions of guilt and history. Their president, Dr. Roman Herzog, didn't fudge them.
Auch das ist die Lektion von Bergen-Belsen.
That too is the lesson of Bergen-Belsen. One isn't only responsible for that which one does, but for that which one allows to happen.
There was another Herzog present, Chaim Herzog, former president of Israel and a captain with the British Army at the time the camp was liberated. He was here then.
What happened in the first half of this century cannot be undone, for no people can step out of its own history and disown it. I do not bring forgiveness with me, nor forgetfulness. The only ones who can forgive are the dead. The living have no right to forget.
When the British Army liberated the camp in April 1945, they destroyed the buildings because of the typhoid raging there. They buried the dead by their thousands in mass graves and summoned local leaders to see what had been done here. 50 years on, the legacy of guilt is still an issue.
The young generation
is trying to amend. And naturally, they couldn't be blamed for what their fathers did.
But another survivor had lost 115 members of his family.
There's not one German among the whole lot to say he is guilty or he knows anything happened. Not one German will admit that he knows someone or he belonged to the SS or Wehrmacht.
The Holocaust survivors are also concerned that, as they are the last living witnesses, when they are gone, the history will be rewritten. Today, it was remembered as it happened. Martin Bell, BBC News, Belsen, Germany.
Russian officials say they've sealed off a gas pipeline which was damaged in a large explosion this morning. The blast created a huge fireball and set a forest on fire. The accident happened 600 miles northeast of Moscow, near the town of Ukhta. No one was injured and the fires are now under control, but there have been a number of leaks in the past year, prompting concern about the state of Russia's pipelines. An oil spill last year, again in northern Russia, has also caused environmental concern. Workers are fighting to contain damage described as worse than that caused by the Exxon Valdez disaster. The incident happened last October at Ozinsk, close to today's explosion at Ukhta. The spill was contained over the winter while rivers were frozen, but it's now spreading across the countryside, putting thousands of birds and other wildlife at risk.
The true scale of the oil spill is only now becoming clear as the earlier than expected spring thaw melts the ice. Thousands of tons of oil across a wide area of this Arctic region. On this site alone, trenches up to 6 feet deep and as big as football pitches have been dug to contain the sludge. It's the home of migrating birds, due to return in just a few weeks' time.
On any scale, this is a huge disaster. If this had occurred in Europe or the United States, there would be huge teams of people and millions of dollars being poured into a cleanup. Because it's here, it's inaccessible, it's a region that not many people know about, there isn't that effort being concentrated on the cleanup.
In some areas, in a desperate attempt to reduce the slick, the Russians are burning the oil. To spur on the cleanup, they have some foreign loans and the help of international experts.
This is an environmental problem. Certainly we're concerned about it. We believe we can contain the oil. We believe we can control it even if the dam collapses. So I think we'll contain the problem, control it, and recover the oil.
This was a small stream a few days ago. As the thaw continues, more and more oil is coming down, which could breach the dam and further contaminate the nearby rivers. The Russians, criticised in the past for complacency and secrecy, are confident they can prevent more damage to the Arctic's fragile environment. The problems are far from over. A recent report commissioned by the World Bank warns that a 12-mile section of pipeline to the north of here may leak oil soon because it's too old and hasn't been maintained properly. Peter Hunt, BBC News, Usinsk, near the Arctic Circle.
Here, 2 men have pleaded guilty to selling bogus titles to wealthy Americans. Southwark Crown Court heard how Stephen Kolakis and Martin Lewis faked Lord of the Manor titles and sold them to unsuspecting Americans. The prosecution said buyers paid thousands of pounds for their carefully crafted wax seals, which were worthless.
It was an audacious plan organised by Stefanos Kolakis and his accomplice Martin Lewis, which targeted wealthy Americans eager to buy their own slice of British history. The 2 men copied original documents from official brochures relating to the ancient titles, created their own versions, and then offered them for sale in newspaper adverts around the world. Many of them were bought by Americans who paid up to $20,000 for worthless certificates. There was laughter in the courtroom when it emerged during the prosecution evidence that one of the bogus titles offered the privilege of a seat in the 18th carriage during the Queen Mother's birthday procession. Another entitled the owner to priority on the Queen's social list. Police officers who led a 2-year investigation said the people duped had no knowledge of how to verify their purchase.
The people were always out of this country that were defrauded. I feel that if they tried to defraud people in this country, it may have been slightly different, certainly in the purchasing of the titles, because accessibility to checking up on those titles would be a lot easier for them.
David Rosso spent $10,000 buying the Lordship of the Manor of Goddington in Oxfordshire. It was bought as a surprise present for his wife, and he completed the deal by fax. Today, at his home in Connecticut, he accepted that he was partially to blame.
I think it was a foolish mistake not to have a solicitor involved from the onset.
it didn't dawn on me that the trading of titles could be done fraudulently. It just didn't creep through my mind. I tend to trust people.
Are you prepared to do it?
Kalakis and Lewis, who now prefers to be known as Lord Lewis, will be back in court next month for sentencing. Paul Newman, BBC News, Southwark Crown Court.
Nigel Mansell should make his comeback in Formula One racing in the San Marino Grand Prix on Sunday. Today he tested out the McLaren car, which has been widened by 2 inches so that he can fit into it. Afterwards he said the test had gone well. The footballer Eric Cantona is understood to have rejected an offer from the Italian club Inter Milan in order to stay with Manchester United. Cantona, who's been ordered to do community service for his attack on a Crystal Palace supporter, will be free to play for United again in October when his suspension from the club ends. Stephen Hendry has completed one of the rarest achievements in snooker, a maximum break of 147 in the World Championship. It's only the 3rd time this has been done in the history of the event.
At the start of this year's World Championship, Stephen Hendry said making a maximum 147 break at Sheffield's Crucible Theatre was one of the few ambitions he had left in the sport. 40 points into frame 12 of his semi-final match against Jimmy White, with the balls neatly positioned at the top end of the table, realising that ambition was a possibility, but there was still a long way to go. 15 reds later, just 6 balls stood between him and his ultimate goal. With the yellow, green and brown safely tucked away, he then played a delightful pot to sink the blue.
Well, the blue's there.
So much was riding on the next 2 shots. If he was nervous, he didn't show it. The crowd were on tenterhooks, while all Jimmy White could do, kept away from the table for so long by Hendry's brilliance, was watch. The final black wasn't easy, but Hendry struck it true. Only the 3rd 147 break in 19 years of world snooker at the Crucible Theatre. His prize for the achievement, £147,000, £1,000 a point. Clive Myrie, BBC News.
Norman Hillier has gone bankrupt, but his customers are considering suing a firm with which he was associated.
Robert and Christine Seymour believe they've lost £50,000. It was invested through Norman Hillier, but they feel that the company which monitored many of his deals should share some of the responsibility.
Why aren't Countrywide forthcoming now? This is all blown up. Instead of just, what can I say, curling up in a corner, hiding. They ought to be coming forward and virtually giving us advice.
In a statement, Countrywide said, having informed the regulatory authorities and the police, Countrywide do not feel it appropriate to make any further statement until the outcome of all inquiries have been completed. Norman Hillier, whose office in Barnsley is now abandoned, has also declined to comment.
West Yorkshire Police have recovered ammunition they believe was used in a fatal shooting at a pub near Bradford. 1 man was killed and 2 others injured at the Raggords Inn at Queensbury.
Mounted police have spent all day combing land near to where the camouflage clothing and ammunition were found. 40-year-old Michael Briggs was killed in the shooting. The landlord of the Raggords Inn, David Baines, was injured, along with the 3rd man, John Paisley. The incident room here at Bradford has been inundated with calls. Officers are hoping today's discovery will lead to a breakthrough.
We can now take the articles and the clothing to forensic, have them examined, hopefully then connect them to the scene.
40 officers are now working on the case, which looks increasingly like a gangland incident.
And that's it from us this evening. We're back in the morning. Good night.
Good evening to you. Well, temperatures have been up and down throughout the week, but most of the sunshine has always been in the west, and once again today, Anglesey came out top of the tree with 12.6 hours. A lot more cloud further north and down the eastern fringes of England, where it was again pretty cold. The ridge of high pressure is with us tonight. That's going to give a fairly general frost, and that ridge of high pressure will give a lot of sunshine tomorrow. But things are beginning to change for the weekend. These weather systems moving in from the southwest, they will bring some warmer weather, but they will also bring some rain to many parts as well. So some very tenuous cloud down the eastern side of both Scotland and England tonight, but some good gaps between some of those patches of cloud. One or 2 showers still across the far northeastern part of Scotland, and some thicker clouds still through the Channel Islands and Cornwall up into Southern Ireland. So no frost there. The more likely areas for frost really being from Cambridgeshire through the Midlands generally up into northern England, much of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Temperatures could be down to -1 to -3 degrees. It does mean to say a cold start, but plenty of blue skies around tomorrow morning. Lots of sunshine, in fact, throughout the day for many parts of England. Further north, I think you're going to find the cloud thickening in the far northern part of Scotland, with some showery bursts of rain coming in during the afternoon.